The Las Cuevas War was a brief armed conflict fought mainly between a force of Texas Rangers, commanded by Captain Leander McNally, and an irregular force of Mexican militia. It took place in November 1875 in and around Las Cuevas, Tamaulipas. The Texans crossed the Rio Grande into Mexican territory with the purpose of returning stolen cattle to the American side of the river, but they were drawn into a battle with local militia forces. When the fighting was over, the Mexicans returned the cattle to the Texans. McNally and his Rangers entered Mexico November 20th. Under cover of brush and scrub oak, they made their way on foot to General Juan Flores Salinas' stronghold at the Rincon de Cucharas outpost of the Las Cuevas Ranch. The ensuing shootout pitted Rangers against an estimated 400 of Salinas' men. Totally outnumbered and fearing the mounted Mexicans would surround his men, McNally ordered his men to pull back to the river to make a stand. At the river, about half the United States Army 24th Infantry and the 8th Cavalry, under Lieutenant Colonel James F. Randlett, had lined up on the Texas side. In the melee that followed, with the aid of the Army firing a Gatling gun on the Mexicans, General Juan Salinas, alcalde of Camargo, and 80 of his banditos died on the river bank. The fighting wasn't over. It was a Mexican standoff, with the militia retreating to regroup after the leader's death, and McNally refusing to back down from his demands on the return of the stolen cattle. Later that afternoon, Major H. Alexander from Fort Ringgold arrived with a message from Colonel Potter at Fort Brown, located on the Rio Grande at Brownsville. Advise Captain McNally to return at once to this side of the river. Inform him that you are directed not to support him in any way while he remains on Mexican territory. If McNally is attacked by Mexican forces on Mexican soil, do not render him any assistance. Let me know if McNally acts on this advice. McNally carefully read the telegram and then issued 4 terse words. The answer is no. At sundown, another message arrived. Major Alexander, commanding Secretary of War Belknap, orders you to demand McNally return at once to Texas. Do not support him in any manner. Inform the Secretary if McNally acts on these orders and returns to Texas. Signed, Colonel Potter. Quote, in less than a minute, Captain McNally penned his now famous reply, near Las Cuevas, Mexico, November 20, 1875. I shall remain in Mexico with my Rangers and cross back at my discretion. Give my compliments to the Secretary of War and tell him and his United States soldiers to go to hell. Signed, Lee H. McNally, commanding. Quote, after a rested night's sleep, Captain McNally moved his men directly opposite Camargo on the Texas side of the river. It was now Sunday, and the stolen cattle had been moved and penned in a corral, but still on the Mexican side of the border and under guard by plenty of armed horsemen riding herd. Diego Garcia, a Camargo official next in charge to the dead alcalde, promised to move the cattle across by 3 p.m. McNally, however, was too smart to trust the Mexicans. He smelled a trap, and in figuring out how to handle it, he pulled his men to Rio Grande City, where they relaxed while he made his plans. At 3 p.m., he made his move. Accounts differ, but McNally returned to the ferry landing, took 16 Rangers, not including himself, and crossed the river in a rowboat in another invasion of Mexico. He also took along 5 horses. The Death Squad, as they have come to be known, were composed of Captain McNally, Lieutenant Thomas Robinson, Lieutenant Jesse Lee Hall, alias Frank Bones, Sergeant George A. Hall, Sergeant John Barclay Armstrong, Sergeant R.P. Oriel, Corporal William L. Rudd, and Rangers Lincoln Rogers Dunnison, Randolph D. Scipio, Robert H. Pitts, William Crump Callicott, Thomas McGovern, Horace G. Mabon, Thomas Sullivan acting as interpreter, George Durham, and Jesus Sandoval, also an interpreter. James R. Wofford is listed in one account as also being along. It is known for certain that the 5 mounted men were Robinson, Sandoval, Hall, Armstrong, and Oriel. The squad marched up the river bank to the customs house, demanded the cattle, and when the Mexican captain stalled by politely saying they didn't the business on Sunday, the Texans promptly took the Mexican captain prisoner. McNally then hauled the prisoner to the Texas side and told the captured Mexican leader to get the cattle started within the hour or he would die. Instead of 250 head returning to Texas, more than 400 were crossed back. Nearly every brand in the Nueces Strip was in the herd, for the King Ranches, running W up near Corpus Christi to Hale and Parker's Half Moon brand over near Brownsville. After the war, at the spot where Salinas died, Mexico erected a stone marker reading,